Tonight on Primetime, a sudden shift in tensions between Washington and Tehran after days of threats around the Strait of Hormuz. The United States signals a pause, saying talks with Iran have been productive. Well, talks begin, but will they hold? Welcome to Primetime. I'm Murad Hamami. Now, tensions remain high in the Middle East, but there are signs of a possible diplomatic opening. President Donald Trump has postponed threatened strikes on Iran's energy infrastructure for 5 days, citing productive talks with Tehran. The move comes as tensions around the Strait of Hormuz continue to escalate. Let's take a look at this report.
US President Donald Trump has postponed military action against Iran's energy infrastructure for 5 days. Trump had on Sunday threatened to destroy Iran's power plants if Tehran failed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to shipping within 48 hours. In a social media post, the US president said the decision to delay military action was due to what he described as very good and productive talks with Iran over the past 2 days. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps on Monday responded to Trump's initial threat, saying it would retaliate against power plants in regions supplying electricity to US bases, as well as economic, industrial and energy infrastructure in which Americans have shares. Iran state media said Trump's extension of the deadline shows the US president has backed down following Iran's warning. The Strait of Hormuz is a critical global shipping lane with around 3,000 vessels transiting each month. Traffic has dropped sharply in recent days due to security concerns following the US and Israel's war with Iran, with at least 21 ships hit, targeted or reporting attacks since the conflict began. Meanwhile, Israel says it is preparing for a prolonged conflict. Air raid sirens sounded across the country early on Sunday, warning of incoming Iranian missiles. The alerts followed overnight strikes in the southern towns of Arad and Dimona, where dozens were injured. Emergency services report that one person has been killed and more than 160 injured in Iranian missile strikes on Israel in the past 24 hours. The Israel Defense Forces said its Chief of General Staff, Ayal Zamir, has approved plans to continue operations against the Iran-backed Hezbollah group in Lebanon. Zamir said the campaign against Hezbollah has only just begun and would continue beyond operations in Iran. It comes as Israel says its own forces misfired artillery that killed an Israeli farmer near the Lebanese frontier. Israel's military is investigating the incident. The IDF says it expects several more weeks of fighting against Iran and Hezbollah as it prepares to expand operations in Lebanon.
Well, joining me now is Mark Merowitz. He's a foreign policy analyst and a professor at SUNY College in New York. Mark, very good to have you with us. Thanks for joining me today. As you know, a lot is going on right now, Mark. We've heard from President Trump. He's had a presser, of course, outside in Florida. Now, he said that there have been talks between his team and the Iranian team, but we've also heard, Mark, that what Iran have said, that there have been no talks that's been going on. What's your take on all this? What's going on, really?
Well, I mean, I take the president at his word. There are talks going on. The question, I think, is who are they talking to? And the official statements coming from Iran are there are no talks. So, again, the supreme leader or the new supreme leader has not been seen. He disappeared. So he's AWOL. And apparently the president said they're not speaking to the supreme leader. They're speaking to a very prominent person. And the question really is that suppose they have a discussion and that person, whoever he may be, agrees to something. How do we know that that can be implemented? We know in the past that Iran has agreed to all sorts of things, such as the 2015 nuclear deal with President Obama, which they violated consistently on a regular basis and continue to develop a nuclear weapon. So question one, who are we talking to? Question two, can that person make a binding deal that is binding on everybody in the Iranian establishment? And question three is, what's the deal going to be? What would be the elements of that big deal. The president is focusing on the nuclear piece and on that dust he talks about, the enriched uranium. But there's a lot more to this crisis, which is, in essence, Iran holding the world hostage, as it did in 1979 and 1980 with American diplomats. It's holding the Straits of Hormuz hostage. It's holding the Iranian people hostage. And that's got to give too. And I think that if we make a quick deal, then maybe, and leave the Iranian people without a solution. There's a very interesting article in the Wall Street Journal today which says, what about Trump's legacy? Is that going to be his legacy, that he made a fast deal and left the Iranian people to sort out their ability to be free on their own? That would not be, I think, a very good look for the president, to be candid. And I don't think he wants that.
No, no, absolutely. I do understand what you're saying there. I mean, like I said, mixed signals not only coming out of Tehran, but also Washington. We saw that Donald Trump sort of spoke out and said, look, I want the uranium. I'll go in. I'll get it myself if I have to. So that's clearly a big deal for the United States. But Mark, I want to get your thoughts on how Israel's going to act, because he's always kind of said, you know, we will pause, we will not attack for the next 5 days, but how about Israel? They've made no such promises, have they? I mean, they could still continue. What are your thoughts?
My thinking on this is that, as Netanyahu has said, and I think this is the reality, and as Rubio has said, and as we know, Trump is calling the shots here. Trump is driving this train. He is the one who is running this engagement with Iran and trying to solve it for the world. And I think he's shown extraordinary leadership. If you listen to the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, you would hear a very ringing endorsement of what the president is trying to do. He's trying to bring Europe together with the United States, the Gulf states, with the world, to try to unite against a malevolent, malicious power that wants to develop nuclear weapons, but most importantly is really enslaving its own people. They took a teenage boy who was a wrestler, a 19-year-old boy, and they hung him for being a protester. Does this say something about this regime? I did want to add, though, you will recall that Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner were negotiating with Iran, and then the United States and Israel attacked. So we really don't know, what does this mean. I think Trump said it. Either they agree or we're going to bomb them. I mean, it's very hard to understand what the reality is and what the facts are. Although I think that the president's objectives here have been endorsed by many world leaders who understand the fact that Iran, as a nuclear wannabe or as a nuclear power, by the way, which possesses long-range missiles, we know that because they attacked the base at Diego Garcia with long-range missiles, which they said they don't have. So my point is, whatever they talk about, whatever they do, what's the credibility of what they're agreeing to anyway? And if it's not complete capitulation, is it worthwhile?
No, no, I totally understand what you're saying there, Mark, honestly, and I take that on board. Look, right now we need to be thinking about de-escalation. Trump has been saying that for weeks, right? We need to get people at the negotiation table. That conversation needs to happen. Now, we are hearing reports that Mohammed Bagher Ghalibaf, the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, J.D. Vance, they're all expected to be in Islamabad, perhaps in the next few days, to get this sort of discussion going. But we've had these peace talks before. There's nothing new here, is there? I mean, you said yourself, what's there how can we trust what Tehran does? But we've also seen Donald Trump on the flip side doing the very same thing, saying, look, we're in discussions right now. Mark, you see that, and then literally moments later, he's bombed Iran. I mean, as viewers, how are we supposed to take this, these meetings seriously?
Well, it's a fair point, but the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, whoever these people are, if the command and control is divided and the IRGC has a center of power and the supreme leader is somehow floating around, who knows what they're going to agree to? And frankly, if you remember, The last time round, when Witkoff and Kushner had a discussion, they went to Trump apparently and said, the discussions are pointless. We're not getting anywhere. Right now, with the regime basically much more, limited in terms of its power, even though it keeps shooting missiles around the world, but they've certainly America and Israel have taken out a lot of their military assets. Who's remaining to make the binding deal that's binding on all centers of power in Iran? There, I think the Speaker of the Parliament, I didn't even know they had a parliament. Do they have a parliament? Does a parliament function? Or is it a Potemkin parliament, which many parliaments are, that just sit there and just do a validation of whatever the supreme leader or the leadership says? If they don't have a central power, then again, I go back to that. What are they agreeing to? So again, the Straits of Hormuz have to be opened. Their support for proxies has to stop. The ballistic missile program has to stop. And most importantly, they have to stop trying to develop a nuclear weapon and turn over the nuclear material. Now, in order to do that, can the Speaker of the Parliament do that? I mean, how can
Mark,
they
you're
that
making
unless
some
you have the
excellent points.
authority?
Mark, you're making some excellent points. But all the points you're making are, what does the United States get? Or what does the rest of the world get? What about Iran? Don't they deserve something?
Oh no, what Iran deserves is freedom for its people. That's what it deserves. There is no other trajectory to me more important than the Iranian people who have suffered under this regime
Sure, but
now
Mark,
for 47
but
years.
how about the years of sanctions both Iran have been under? Can they be lifted? Can Trump say, "Oh, look, okay, we're going to lift all the years, 50 odd years, 40 odd years of sanctions"? Trump has to come to the table with something, surely.
I totally agree with you, but as we say in New York, been there, done that. We've been there. We removed sanctions. We piled up billions of dollars on a plane and sent it to Iran. And what did they do about it? What did they do? They used the money to support the Houthis and Hezbollah and Hamas. And it's obvious to me they're going to do the same thing again. In other words, if they're going to change their regime, it's not enough to just change the leader. It's to change the perspective and the approach to the rest of the world, which has been purely malevolent and sending nuclear weapons to destroy Israel and Europe if they could reach it, and the United States, the big Satan, the little Satan. If they're going to change that and free up the Iranian people, then the sanctions surely could be lifted. But why lift sanctions on a regime that is just going to take advantage of it as they did in the past? So again, I think the question is here, who are we dealing with? What's their authority? And how committed are they? And how strong are they in order to push back against those forces in that country that have led to the destruction of Iran, to make it into not only a pariahs. It's a pariah state. It's attacking the Gulf states. Can you imagine? What an incredible either blunder or a maniacal move on a part of a desperate power to attack the Gulf states, into thinking that maybe the Gulf states would run to President Trump and beg him, like with Qatar some time ago, to stop the bombing. None of that happened, yet they continue to do the same thing because in their quiver, to use Robin Hood, to use the analogy of the old bowsman, they have no other arrow in their quiver but missiles to shoot them at people, including civilians. That's all they've got. If that's all they've got, then they're doomed, in my opinion. And the people of Iran need to rise up and have a free life, not to be imprisoned and not to have teenage boys, young boys, killed and hung for protesting in the
All right,
streets.
Mark.
That is
No, I do follow what you're saying. I really do. Sadly, we don't have a lot of time. I'd like to get this one more question in, though. There are reports that Trump is using this 5-day pause as a sort of a chance to reinforce that. We are hearing that more military personnel are heading to the region. Let's say that this 5-day pause expires, the Strait of Hormuz is not opened. What's next? Are we going to see something super aggressive from the United States, do you think?
I do think that the Europeans will get together with us and they're going to take Karg Island or Kesh or Kish or any of these islands that have been used for the Iranian export program and do some things that we're not expecting. In the chess game here, the United States has been very strategic and I think very smart in terms of its moves. And the idea is not to hurt the people. In other words, if you're attacking the power plant, I understand the point in the energy, everybody gets hurt. So the point is to be strategic. To take out their export island, that would be very, very good. To be able to do that, I think the United States could do it. In other words, we need a few levers against Iran to make them come to the table legitimately to work up a deal where they open the Strait of Hormuz. They have to open the Strait of Hormuz. That is a violation of international law that they closed it. The right of transit passage is something that is sacred in international law, and they can't just flout the whole world. In other words, they have taken a position, they can do whatever they want, they don't have to follow the law, they can sponsor terrorism, develop ballistic missiles, do these other things. They really have to stop doing that and open the Straits of Hormuz. If they open the strait, that's the first step in the chess game where we get back into normal and the economy of the world is not endangered to have to collapse. I mean, that to me is the moving part here that is really moving the president. He's worrying about the economy. He's worrying about public opinion. He's worrying about the midterm elections, to be sure. So that's why his timelines are very short, and he's trying to figure out a way out and a way around this. But you have to have a partner to deal with who is willing to make peace as well. And there is where I have a gigantic question mark, and I'm not sure there is one, but
yeah,
I
very
hope
interesting,
so.
very interesting indeed. Professor Mark Merrow, it's a pleasure, sir, to have you on the program. Thank you so much for your time.
Same here. Mark. Thank you.
Well, President Donald Trump told reporters the United States has held talks with Iran and that the two sides had, quote, major points of agreement. Now, he added that if the negotiations continued productively, there would be a deal very soon. Earlier, Trump said he had given orders to postpone any military strikes against Iranian power plants for 5 days. That's hours ahead of a deadline that threatened further escalation in the conflict, now in its fourth week.
We have had very, very strong talks. We'll see where they lead. We have major points of agreement. I would say almost all points of agreement. Perhaps that hasn't been conveyed. The communication, as you know, has been blown to pieces. They're unable to talk to each other. But we've had very strong talks. Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner had them. They went, I would say, perfectly. I would say that if they carry through with that, it'll end that problem, that conflict.
Well, in an interview with Fox News, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says 22 countries are now coordinating efforts to restore access through the Strait of Hormuz. He stressed the need for allies to act together. Here's what he had to say.
When it comes to the Strait, what we need to do is to work together. These 22 nations, again, most of them from NATO, but also the other ones I mentioned, to work through what is needed, when is it needed, and how we will make this together as soon as the time is ripe to get this done, to make sure that the Strait of Hormuz opens up.
Well, productive talks between US President Donald Trump and Iran are being welcomed in London. A spokesperson for Prime Minister Keir Starmer says Britain wants to see de-escalation in the Middle East and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Earlier, following reports that Iran had fired 2 missiles at a joint US-UK military base in the Indian Ocean, Prime Minister Keir Starmer said there is no current assessment that mainland Britain is being targeted by Iran. He also said any effort to reopen the Strait of Hormuz would require careful planning, adding his priority is protecting British interests and de-escalating tensions.
Well, look, we carry out assessments all the time in order to keep us safe, and there's no assessment that we're being targeted in that way at all. But of course, it's my job to ensure that British interests, British lives are always uppermost in my mind. What we need here is de-escalation. We need And that's why we had a statement from a number of countries last week about what we need to do about the Straits of Hormuz, which obviously needs careful coordination and a viable plan. But it's very important we defend our interests, we defend British lives, but without getting dragged into the war. And that's the clear divide I've put in place. Yes, defend our interests, defend British lives. No, not get dragged into the war.
Yeah, well, my next guest tonight is joining us from Washington, D.C. He's a political analyst and he's based in Washington, D.C. As I said, his name is, of course, Eric Ham. I haven't seen him for a while, but I'm so glad to see you. Eric, great to have you on the show. A pleasure. It's been a while, sir. Thanks for taking the time. I'd like to we heard from Keir Starmer there. We've heard from Mark Rutte. Clearly, everyone has a say. My earlier guest, of course, just a few moments ago, Professor Merowitz, talked a little bit about how this war is playing out. There seems to be some form of negotiation going on, though that's mixed. But Eric, I'd like to get your thoughts on how things are playing out domestically. I mean, is Trump, if we're talking about this 5-day pause here, how has this worked out at home? Is there like domestic pressure in the houses? Tell us how things are playing out there.
Well, the reason for this about face and President Trump capitulating makes clear that he is feeling enormous pressure, not only domestically, globally, but also, and more importantly, economically. The United States certainly is winning the war militarily, but it's fighting the war on Iranian terms. Iran is attempting to make this war as difficult for the U.S. allies in the region, other Gulf nations, neighboring countries. But it also recognizes that it has an enormous hand to play, particularly with the Strait of Hormuz. And I'm sure, as most of your viewers already know, that is where 20% of both oil and natural gas flow through, as well as other products. This is creating a massive, massive increase as well as volatility of the markets. And President Donald Trump did this about face, recognizing that the markets were certainly going to open way, way down on his ultimatum. So clearly he had boxed himself into a corner that he was unable to get out of unless we saw him do what he did today, which was actually capitulate and then back away from his own deal, which only reinforces this idea of Taco Trump. Trump always chickens out. And that's what we saw. The reason for the pause, of course, is once again, if you look at this domestically, the president is trying to get a $200 billion supplemental package through Congress. That already was going to be a very, very heavy lift, particularly for Republican lawmakers who are seeing their hopes and chances of maintaining control of Congress in the fall slip away. Add to that the president's bluster of destroying energy sites in Iran, which was going to only make the war that much more catastrophic, keep the United States more engaged, potentially leading to boots on the ground, and also seeing a prolonged war. This was something that the president simply just did not have the political will and the stomach to actually engage in. So this is why we saw the president make another stunning move today. Why we're seeing the pause, of course, is the president is desperate. He is desperate to try to change the trajectory economically of this war. It is not going over well in the United States. In fact, now the numbers are now somewhere around 60% of Americans who disapprove of the president's handling of this war. That number could only continue to rise as we see energy prices in the United States continue to skyrocket, as well as volatility. And just to give you a sense of some of that volatility, we saw this morning around 7 a.m., president announced that there was going to be this pause. We saw futures and markets before they opened rise exponentially. Iran comes out, says that they have not spoken to Donald Trump. This isn't true. And then we saw nearly $1 trillion in wealth automatically wiped out. So a $3 trillion swing even before the markets open. President Donald Trump recognizes he's got to keep the markets calm. He's got to bring some stability back to them, but he also has to try to figure out a way to shape the narrative that the United States is winning this war, even though we see right now the president is increasingly isolated with, as you just mentioned, NATO nations, 22 countries are now trying to figure out a way to address their own needs, while at the same time keeping the United States isolated. And so what we're seeing
and
here is
actually,
President Donald Trump is isolated both
Eric,
at home and abroad.
forgive me for interrupting there. That's what I wanted to say. You use that word quite interestingly, isolated. Is he isolated? Or does he have the backing of Capitol Hill? Is he just waking up one morning and posting something on Truth Social? Just anything that he feels like? What happens if those 5 days passes and nothing happens? Are we going to see more escalation? You're saying the people of America are not happy with how Donald Trump is running the country right now. So what's next?
To be clear, I am not saying that the people of America are not happy. The people of America are saying that they are not happy. I am simply just stating what they are telling pollsters in terms of what they think and how they feel about this war. More importantly, those lawmakers who represent those very same people have also made clear that they are becoming increasingly jittery about this war because, again, there's still no credible reason as to why the United States went in. An overwhelming majority of Americans believe that this was a war of choice that the president actually took, not something that needed to happen. And we also saw evidence of that last week as his own intel chiefs testified before Congress, contradicting each other as well as the president. So the president is single-handedly trying to shape the narrative of this war, even though we continue to see over and over from within his own administration, we're getting different viewpoints, as well as we know Joe Kent, Donald Trump's one of his top intel people, resigned last week, basically shattering this narrative that Iran was an immediate threat to the United States. And so what we're seeing here is, yes, the president is isolated. He is isolated at home. We know about the overtures to NATO, G7, and other Western powers to help to try to open the Strait of Hormuz. No one has come to the president's aid. And I think what we're seeing here is, as this war continues to play out, Iran has been very strategic in being able to cause enormous economic pain on the United States, recognizing they cannot win militarily, but what they can do is make this war as uncomfortable as possible for President Trump and the United States.
Yeah, you make some great points there. We have heard, though, from Mark Rutte that some 22 countries should band together and at least protect the Strait of Hormuz. Are you not thinking that's going to happen?
But again, when we say, or when he says protect the Strait of Hormuz, are they protecting the Strait of Hormuz that will work in the interest of the United States or their own? We know that already countries like Japan have opened up their strategic reserves, recognizing that as the oil flows into their country become cut off, that makes it more difficult. In addition to that, we know oil is a global commodity. And while President Donald Trump talks so much about having access to Venezuelan oil, it doesn't matter how much oil the United States has or if it's an independent oil producing nation. Oil prices are actually predicated by the markets, not by who has the most. And so certainly the United States will reap the benefit. But again, the costs are astronomical, making it that much more difficult for the American people. And we got to remember, gas prices, I should say, in the United States have risen nearly $1 per gallon in just 2 weeks. That's an enormous increase in prices on Americans who are already feeling stretched thin because of rising prices and inflation. And so right now what we're seeing here is Donald Trump is becoming much more quickly a lame duck president. And clearly, I think the question now becomes, can he actually hold his base together? Republican lawmakers are not publicly castigating this president, but quietly behind closed doors, I can tell you I'm hearing from a number of people on Capitol Hill, they are increasingly concerned and worried about where this is headed and just how long they can continue to support this president.
Eric, if I may, I really do appreciate your time. I've got one final question really for you, and that is, you know, America's always sort of known for its strength, isn't it? How important is strength here over diplomacy? Do the people of Capitol Hill, do they want Trump to sit down and get this over and done with and signed away, or are they aching to get boots on the ground?
No one wants boots on the ground. Even President Donald Trump does not want boots on the ground. And if we're talking about strength over or versus diplomacy, clearly what we're seeing here is President Donald Trump simply does not have the ability to engage in diplomacy. All he knows is strength. But what we are seeing here is that strength simply does not move Tehran. Clearly, Tehran recognizes that there is no place else to go, and they recognize that they hold all the cards as they have an iron grip on the Strait of Hormuz. So as long as they continue to hold the Strait of Hormuz closed and are able to quick strike with their rapid missile capability, they can continue to fight this war. And even though they will continue to lose assets, they are still placing President Donald Trump in an enormous corner with very little way out.
Indeed, indeed. Well, very interesting indeed. Eric Ham, a pleasure, sir. Always good to see you. Thank you so much for your insights. Hope to talk to you again one day soon. Thanks again.
You bet. Thank you.
Well, staying in the United States, an Air Canada flight from Montreal to New York's LaGuardia Airport collided with a fire truck after landing on the runway. Now, the crash killed both pilots and left dozens of passengers injured. Let's take a look.
On Sunday, a Bombardier CRJ900 jet, arriving from Montreal with 72 passengers and 4 crew, was landing shortly before midnight when it hit a fire truck responding to an unrelated incident. Airport officials said the vehicle had been sent to deal with a separate issue involving an aborted takeoff of a United Airlines flight. The pilot and co-pilot of the Air Canada Express plane were killed in the crash. 2 officers in the fire truck were seriously injured, but are in a stable condition.
The plane carried 72 passengers and 4 crew. The ARFF vehicle carried 2 officers. Initial numbers indicate that 41 passengers and crew were transported to the hospital, as well as the ARF officers. At this time, we understand that 32 have been released, but there are also serious injuries.
The incident led to the airport's closure, authorities said. LaGuardia is now closed while authorities investigate, and the closure could continue. Police have urged people to avoid the area. The shutdown caused major disruption on Monday, adding to long queues in the New York area linked to a Transport Security Administration funding crisis.
It's really devastating indeed. Now, after the break, we'll discuss the London ambulance attack and the growing concerns around anti-Semitism and community safety in the UK. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time. Police in the UK are investigating an arson attack on 4 Jewish charity ambulances in London. The vehicles belong to a Jewish community charity in the Golders Green area. Now, the government loan replacement ambulances to the charity and fund permanent replacements. Ollie Barrett, A News' Ollie Barrett reports now from London.
Well, counter-terror police are leading the investigation into what they say looks like an arson attack, which is being treated as an anti-Semitic hate crime. Police say they are looking into claims of responsibility that have been made by a group online, but they cannot yet verify those claims of responsibility. The London Fire Brigade say they were called at around 1:40 a.m. local time in the vehicles where a number of cylinders which exploded, causing some damage to properties nearby. Forensic police have been seen carrying out searches in nearby roads as they try and look for clues as to who did carry out this attack, and CCTV does appear to identify 3 people in hoods, according to police, pouring what appears to be accelerant on the vehicles before setting them on fire and then fleeing the scene. Now, the ambulance service that we are talking about here was set up in 1979, and this is how the chief rabbi, Ephraim Mervis, describes it. He says its sole mission is to protect life, Jewish and non-Jewish alike. Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, has been leading the response to this incident. He's been hosting representatives and leaders from the Jewish community at Downing Street today off the back of this incident. He's described this as not an isolated incident. He says the rise of anti-Semitic hatred is there for all to see, and we've also seen condemnation coming from across the political spectrum as well. Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservatives, saying that this is a volunteer-run ambulance service. She says the police must find those responsible, and she says a hatred of Jews is growing in our country, and she's called on other political leaders to make sure that that is something that the British political establishment and the British people get on top of as quickly as they possibly can. As I say, police investigations very much ongoing. Ollie Barrett in London for A News.
Well, joining us now is Oliver Dean, digital editor at Mace Magazine. He's joining us, of course, from London. Oliver, good to see you. Thanks for joining us here today. Oliver, we just heard the details there from our correspondent Ollie there in London. Really, how serious are the authorities taking what's going on today?
Well, thank you very much, Guy, for having me on. I think they are taking it very seriously. We've seen this be escalated to the counter-terrorism task force. We've seen a number of, like you say, forensic officers on scene to examine other roads, other areas. We saw the actual magnitude of the explosion and the blast reach 4 or 5 stories high. And so I think it's right that the authorities are taking this very seriously. And I mean, a manhunt is underway. We're trying to find the suspects. It's not clear which suspects are necessarily to blame yet. Like you said earlier, we've seen one group claim responsibility, but there are a number of rumours as to who is to blame for this. But no, it's very good that the police are taking this as seriously as they are.
Yeah, I mean, Keir Starmer clearly, of course, has condemned these actions strongly, obviously, but politically, how sensitive is this? Do you think this is happening because of what's happened, I don't know, in the Middle East right now, or is this just a rise in anti-Semitism in general?
I don't think that the claim that this is necessarily to do with things in the Middle East is unfounded. I think that that is a very logical inference to make, given the situation, given what we've seen in the Middle East over the last few weeks. But this is an incredibly sensitive issue. As you say, we've seen Keir Starmer call this out for what it is. We've seen Shabana Mahmood make a statement in the House of Commons earlier addressing the severity of this situation. And it comes at a time when anti-Semitism is becoming more and more commonplace in the UK. We've seen the number of anti-Semitic hate crimes increase, particularly since the attacks of October 7th, 2023. And so, as you say, this is a very sensitive issue. And I think everybody in charge and everybody from across the political aisle is taking this very seriously.
Very seriously indeed. Oliver, is this becoming more of a national debate, do you think, on anti-Semitism? Or are we looking at, hopefully this will just pass and we won't have to perhaps talk about it too much? Because at the end of the day, the more you talk about it, the more sort of inflamed it gets.
Yes, that's a very fair point to make, and I hope, and I think everybody hopes, that this is going to remain an isolated incident. But the fact of the matter is that the Prime Minister has said himself that the rise in anti-Semitism is clear for all to see, and we've seen a number of Jewish community leaders come out today and complain about the state of anti-Semitism in the United Kingdom. And so whether this remains an isolated incident or not is unclear, but what is clear is that it's definitely becoming an issue that is becoming normalised.
Yeah, Oliver, I mean, we've heard from Keir Starmer, but have we heard from any other politicians? Have they come out and said anything, or any other community leaders have anything they made any statements today?
I mean, we've seen Kemi Badenoch come out and call this out and criticise it and saying that we all need to band together. We saw, as I mentioned, Shabana Mahmood make a statement in the House of Commons saying that we need to rally behind one another and all come together in the face of such sinister and wicked crimes. And we've also seen community leaders from across the spectrum, not only Jewish community leaders, but other religious groups as well, all pushing the narrative that we need to be rallying behind this and that this shouldn't be a divisive issue. Violence of any kind should not be tolerated. Religious violence of any kind should not be tolerated. And I'm glad to see that there is that consensus amongst those in the UK.
And finally, Oliver, really, what steps can the government really take to make sure that there is more sort of safety at home?
Well, I think that's a very difficult thing to kind of quantify. I think first and foremost, the government needs to make sure that everybody is on the same page in calling this out for what it is and making sure that violence is not accepted in any form or capacity. And I think that they're taking the correct steps in unifying communities, unifying those across the political aisle to make sure that this is called out. And in doing that, he's making sure, and politicians are making sure, that this type of behavior is not normalized, and that will have long-term positive effects for the future.
Well, let's hope so indeed. Oliver Dean there, for digital editor at Mace Magazine. So thank you so much for joining us here today on Primetime. A pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, thank you very much.
Right after the break, we'll get the latest from our correspondents in their regions. Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time. Now, tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan remain high despite a temporary Eid al-Fitr ceasefire brokered by regional mediators. Now, both sides accuse each other of violating the truce with cross-border attacks. A News' correspondent Tamim Bahis has the story.
A fragile ceasefire between Afghanistan and Pakistan is under strain as officials in Kabul and Islamabad trade allegations of a violation during the Eid holidays. Afghan authorities say Pakistan forces fired mortar shells on Sunday morning into Narai district of Kunar province, killing one civilian and injuring a woman. Afghanistan's Ministry of Defense says additional violations occurred along the Durand line, adding that several civilians were reportedly killed on the first day of Eid. The ministry says Afghan forces have so far refrained from retaliatory actions to avoid further escalation, but warned they would respond decisively if incidents continue. Meanwhile, Pakistani media report that a mortar allegedly fired from Afghanistan struck a house in central Kurram in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, killing one civilian and injuring three others. Islamabad has rejected Afghan allegations, with Pakistan's Ministry of Information and Broadcasting calling the claims ridiculous and baseless. In a statement, the ministry said Pakistan has not violated the ceasefire and accused Afghan authorities of spreading falsehoods. The exchange of accusations highlights the fragile nature of the Eid ceasefire, raising concerns about renewed escalation along the border. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Well, 3 Turkish nationals were killed in a helicopter crash over the weekend in Qatar in an incident involving a joint Turkish-Qatari military mission. Officials say the aircraft went down during training activities in Qatar's territorial waters. Let's go now to Adam Morrow in Istanbul for more.
3 Turkish nationals, including a Turkish military officer serving in the Qatar-Turkey Joint Forces Command in Doha, were killed in a helicopter crash in Qatar's territorial waters over the weekend. All 7 people aboard the aircraft have since been confirmed dead. According to Turkey's Ministry of National Defense, the helicopter belonged to the Qatari Armed Forces and was conducting routine training activities when it crashed into the sea on Saturday evening. Among the victims were 1 Turkish military officer and 2 technicians from Aselsan, a major Turkish defense company. The ministry said 4 members of the Qatari Armed Forces had also been killed in the accident. Officials added that the exact cause of the crash would be determined following an investigation by Qatari authorities. Qatar's defense ministry later said that the helicopter had suffered a technical failure during a routine mission before going down in regional waters. There was no indication that hostile action played any role in the incident. Turkey's defense ministry has stressed that military coordination activities between Ankara and Doha were continuing uninterrupted within the framework of existing agreements. The United Arab Emirates, for its part, issued a statement expressing condolences to the families of the victims and to both Turkey and Qatar. The helicopter crash occurred amid heightened regional tensions. Since the start of joint U.S.-Israeli attacks on Iran in late February, Qatar has faced repeated drone and missile strikes. The country's Ras Laffan industrial city has been hit multiple times, raising concerns about regional security and military activity in Gulf waters. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Well, Turkmenistan is stepping up cooperation with international financial institutions as it prepares a new strategy with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. A News' Sevil Rajapova reports.
Turkmenistan is strengthening cooperation with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development as part of efforts to expand external economic partnerships and attract long-term investment. Plans for a new cooperation strategy covering 2026 to 2030 were presented during a Cabinet of Ministers meeting chaired by President Serdar Berdimuhamedov. The document is expected to serve as a framework for financing projects in both the public and private sectors. Turkmenistan has been a member of the EBRD since 1992, with more than 80 projects implemented to support financial sector modernization, trade and industrial growth. Looking ahead, cooperation is expected to focus on transport and logistics infrastructure, including the construction and modernization of railways and highways. Authorities also aim to align future projects with the European Union's Global Gateway Initiative, which promotes sustainable connectivity and investment. A working group involving the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Central Bank and other economic institutions will develop a detailed roadmap for cooperation in the coming months, with negotiations expected to begin in the near term. Overall, the move reflects Turkmenistan's efforts to diversify its economy, attract investment, and play a bigger role in regional trade and connectivity. It is Sevil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Well, that's a wrap for Prime Time tonight from all of us here at A News. Thanks for watching and we'll see you again tomorrow.